I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens. That takes care of the thumbnail. I had a few people comment that that was what I'd done on my thumbnail because I was doing the thing. Good morning, everybody. Now, just before we get into it, and while people are still connecting, my weekly Aboriginal awareness note. I just discovered that a long, long time ago, like tens of thousands of years ago, Aboriginal people of Australia developed a type of thermoplastic resin which they created by beating resin out of porcupine grass and grass trees. So they would beat it to get the sap out of it, and then heat it over a fire, which would turn it into a sticky black substance. And it was thermoplastic, which means that it hardens as it cools. And they would use that as an adhesive to attach rock to wood, for example, for making tools and that sort of thing. So the Aboriginal people of Australia invented thermoplastic resins a long, long time ago. Okay, so I like learning cool new things. Good morning, everybody. Hey, Apostolos said that it is 1 o'clock in the morning in Greece where he is watching from, and I think he wants to go to bed, so I'm just doing a shout out to Apostolos before he goes, so at least he's turned up for the start of the stream. So we've got a whole lot of people here today. 50 Hertz, Paul is here, Tony Smith is here, Sion, Unexpected Maker, Johnny, we've got lots of the regular people. Hey, Dana is here. Dana. So for those of you who don't know, Dana does crazy Photoshop work around Macs, some of which should not have existed under any circumstances, and you need to like clean your eyes out after you've seen them, and some that just make me think, I wish those were made. There is a crazy one that Dana just did a few days ago, which was, what was it, the PowerBook 140S, I can't remember which number it was, the dual screen PowerBook with 2 trackballs on it. That one broke my brain. But maybe what you could do is use it for like those magic eye things where you have one screen for each eye. Anyway, Peter from calling in from Tasmania, good to see you here. Mike Carden's here. So Mike said something very interesting which is relevant to the topic today, and we're going to get back to that. And Cable Ties here, Mike O'Connor. All right, so this subject today, I feel, maybe this is ironic, I feel totally unqualified to be talking about this subject. And it's one that I thought that when I posted this, like the topic for this particular live stream, it would just be a matter of having a nice time looking through some course summaries and seeing if I should go back to uni, and if I do, what courses I should look at. There are a few options. And what really got people's attention was the reason that I'm asking that question in the first place. And there seem to be some very strong opinions about it, ranging from, you're being ridiculous and alarmist and this doesn't change anything, and just stop being silly, to the sky is falling and we're not going to be able to do our jobs anymore. So as with all things, well, with most things, when there are two extremes, the reality is somewhere in there, in the middle. There are elements of it that are bad, there are elements of it that are okay, so let's just talk through it and see what we can figure out. Now, the cable tie, darned auto carrot, yes. Auto carrot will get you every time. So, some of you are probably wondering what the hell I'm talking about because you turn up to the live stream every Sunday and you don't know what I'm referring to. So, to back it up a little, here in Australia, and also I'm going to be talking about something that is specific to Victoria, Australia, but it does have implications elsewhere, particularly in Australia, and of course there are many people overseas who are in jurisdictions where this is already the case. The things I'm talking about being introduced in Victoria have already been that way in many other parts of the world. It's a new thing for us, but it's not necessarily a new thing for you. So there is experience that you might have that would be very interesting and relevant to this, even if you're not in Australia. Now, oh, I'm maybe not going to keep up with the chat very well today. I'm going to try, but if you have ideas and feedback on this, please stick it in the chat. I will try to follow it. Unfortunately, Andy, who usually does my back channel work and watches for things and then prompts me to not overlook stuff, is at a fundraising barbecue today for the Melbourne Hackerspace. So he's standing outside Bunnings serving sausages, probably using the sauce bot, the little CNC sauce dispenser that was built at Melbourne Hackerspace. That's a fun project. But I'm not going to chase that squirrel. That squirrel is it's begging me to chase it, but I'm going to refuse. So, alright, the subject, the background. A couple of years ago, well, over the space of several years, the Victorian government and other state governments were lobbied to introduce new legislation relating to the practice of engineering as a profession. And in Victoria and most places in Australia, there has been no restriction on doing things like calling yourself an engineer or undertaking engineering-related work. But in 2019, new legislation was passed which makes engineering a protected class of work. And there are several aspects to it. There is the title aspect, so what you're allowed to call yourself, and there's also the work aspect, the sort of work that you're allowed to undertake. And that legislation comes into effect on July 1st this year, so a couple of months' time. And after that, there are certain things that you can do legally now that you won't be able to legally do. So, the result of all of this, on the face of it, it looks like for someone like myself, okay, so to give my own situation, I do contract. I've got to be careful about what I say now. Right now, I suppose it's legal, so I can say it. I do contract engineering work, in that people come to me and say, I have a need for a particular device, or I need to solve a particular problem, and we talk through the requirements and determine what the deliverables need to be. Often there is like an iterative process where we need to properly understand the requirements. So we go through prototyping and then iterate on the design. We come up with a design which typically involves a combination of hardware and software. You know, they're classic microcontroller projects. And for those of you who have been coming along to the live stream, you've all seen things like the water cannon project. So it's, you know, mechatronics type stuff. It's robots and moving stuff around and control systems. I do quite a lot of assistive technology work as well, so things like custom input devices, working with my friend Chris. And so the question is whether I can continue to do that without complying with the new legislation that's coming in, or that has come in and that is about to be enforced. So, let's... Dana said, it's E only if it's studied at uni. If it's obtained elsewhere, it's just sparkling electricity. With enough potential difference, all electricity sparkles. So, yeah, so, where are we going to go with this? Alright, maybe what I should do is explain. I mean, there's a whole lot of documentation I can get to as well. I've got a folder here on my desktop with PDFs of guidelines, and I've got the actual legislation I've got here, which anybody can look at, and all sorts of documents and things that we can look at. So we'll get to that. So I'm going to start with a story, and maybe this will explain some of the context of my non-traditional path to where I am right now, and the fact that this is a problem for me. and that there are probably many other people who are in a similar situation. Now, this is going to sound like I'm going way back in time. I'll try to keep it brief and not chase too many squirrels. The primary school that I went to was very non-traditional. It had unstructured classes. There were the number of students varied. It was between like 12 and I think about 18 students across all the primary school year levels at any one time. So there weren't really structured classes. There was no timetable, and we were largely encouraged to learn and work on whatever it was that we were interested in, which has both advantages and disadvantages. It means that my primary schooling was a bit bizarre. Very strong in some areas, very weak in others. And to some extent I'm still feeling the effect of the weakness, because there are lots of basic things that I did not learn, and other things or opportunities that I had that other people didn't have. For example, when I was still in primary school, probably about grade 5 or 6, I can't remember which, I read a book about the fundamental principles of how computers work. Now I remember that this was it would have been about 1982, I think, 1981, something like that, pre-personal computer, all of that sort of thing. And I became really interested in the concept of Turing machines and how they worked. So when I was in about grade 5 or 6, I made myself a Turing machine out of a little cardboard box, a piece of foam, and a strip of paper. I cut slots in the box, I cut a window in the front of it, and put the foam inside, and then put the paper strip through. So the idea is you can move the paper strip backwards and forwards through the box, and only a small part of it is visible through the window at a time. And then what you can do is, if you've got a long strip of paper, you effectively have yourself a Turing machine. You can put commands into the box, like what you see on the window, and the commands can be things like to move a certain number of positions, etc. So, and I did this in primary school, which is not when most people are learning about Turing machines. And then through secondary school, I went from a very eclectic, crazy primary school to a very formal grammar school for high school, secondary school. I went to St. Michael's Grammar, which was kind of the opposite. And there I did the classic straight science sort of thing. So I was doing physics, chemistry, mathematics, like double mathematics, that sort of thing. And so this bit is going to sound like bragging, but this is all setting up the lead into my university experience. So I did okay at school. So I won national level prizes in physics, chemistry, and mathematics, and then had some issues. I ended up after year 12, going into Monash University. Well, it was Chisholm Institute of Technology, which then merged with Monash, studying a Bachelor of Applied Science in Robotics and Digital Technology. So that course is what today we would call mechatronics. At the time, it was the only course that I could find that combined electronics, software, and some aspects of mechanical engineering. So basically teaching you how to build robots. And it seemed like the ideal course for me. It was what I was really interested in. Oh, but backing up. Okay, so still while I was at high school, before I got to this point, this is important because it leads into what I'm about to tell you about. While I was still in high school, so I would have been, I think I was about 16, I designed my first proper computer, which was a Z80 based system, and I designed the circuit board by drawing it on paper, like no CAD. It was just a piece of paper. I drew the schematic by hand, and then I essentially worked like from a mental net list and reproduced it all by drawing it out on a piece of paper and drawing the tracks on the PCB. And then I made the PCB myself with a Dello resistive pen and etched the circuit board using ferric chloride and made myself my own little computer, which I had designed myself. So I did that. I think I was either 16 or 17 when I did that. Okay, so by the time I got into mechatronics, I think it's called mechatronics now, RDT, robotics and digital technology, I had already spent years doing hands-on electronics, doing things like Z80 machine code programming, designing my own electronic circuits, and all of those sorts of things. I just did that because I loved it. And then when I got to first year of RDT, what I found was that the course was structured, and this is not a fault of the course, I'm not saying this in a negative sense, this is just the reality. The course was structured to cater for people coming into it with zero background experience. They'd gone through high school, they'd got the score necessary to get in, they'd never held a soldering iron in their lives, they didn't know what a resistor was. So the entry stuff was really, really basic. So through first year, we went through all the usual first year things, subjects like digital logic, and there was software development and other related things. And so the result of all of this was, because of the projects that I had done up until that point, just in my own time, the digital electronics part of it in particular, I thought, this is no problem. I already know far more than what they're teaching us in the course. I can just kind of relax and get through this. And I really focused more on things like the software side of things, because that was what I had the least experience with at the time. So, first year, RDT, exams. I ended up finishing first year with the third highest mark in the class. I think it was 120 or so people intake that year. I got the third highest mark for software development, and I failed digital design, so digital logic. And I was rather confused about this. So I went to the lecturer who, so my lecturer for the digital logic class, and asked to talk to him about how I'd gone wrong, like what had I screwed up. And this little conversation is one of those things that, sometimes there are pivotal moments where you have a conversation or something happens and it changes the following decades or the rest of your life. This conversation was one of those moments. And it wasn't a very long conversation. So I went in and spoke to him and said, I don't understand, I've been doing fairly well in other things. I need to understand how I failed this so that I can, do better, work it out. And he said, okay. First thing he said was, you have no understanding, or what's the word? Yeah, you have no understanding or aptitude for electronics, and you will never be able to work in this field. And I said, can you show me what I did wrong in the exam to help me understand? And so he pulled out my exam paper and said, okay, this is a perfect example of what you've done wrong. And it was a question, it was one of those classic logic questions. So we'd been going through logic gates like AND gates and OR gates and that sort of thing. And it's one of those questions where you have to draw the boxes in with the signal, and it gives you inputs and it gives you outputs. And you have to design the logic to create the necessary outputs from the inputs. And I'd drawn a logic diagram within the box. And he said, you've answered this question. I failed you on this question. And I said, but that circuit works. If you put those inputs into it, you get that output out of it. And he said, yeah, but you've used an inverter here in the circuit. And I said, yes, because you need an inverted version of this input signal in order for this circuit to work. And he said, yes, you do, but I haven't shown you inverters. You should have assumed that there was an inverted version of the signal already available and used that. And it's like, what? And that moment when he said that, I think was the moment that I lost all respect for the process. That story sounds like I'm making it up, but that is the conversation. That's what happened. And I walked out of there, and that was pretty much the end of my university time. I did go back the following year, but my heart just wasn't in it. I was done at that point. It was like, you're an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. I'm not even gonna talk to you anymore. Like, I'm done with you. And so I had a bit of a dummy spit, which was largely my immaturity at the time. I could have worked around this problem, but I didn't. Instead, I did a dummy spit. And the other thing that I should point out is that at the time, so in first year uni, I met a guy who was doing a totally different course, different class. Guy who became my really good friend, Adrian. And yeah, he was the best man at my wedding. But anyway, the point of telling you about Adrian is that we were both into cars, so rotary powered cars in particular. And he had an RX-3. I just bought a Mazda, which I was wanting to do a rotary conversion on. And so, we met, in the street outside uni, started talking about stuff. And it was at this time that I started a business called Rotor Systems Research, or RSR, building automotive electronics for four-cylinder and rotary cars. And so I was advertising in Fast Forwards and Rotaries magazine, and at the time, so this was 1990, around 1991, that sort of period, I designed things like, well, the first thing I did, which was very, very simple, it's a classic 555 circuit, is a turbo timer. And I sold heaps of those through Fast Forwards and Rotaries magazine. And then I did a slightly different version of it. I took the same concept and came up with a device which was an automatic fuel shutoff. And what you would do is connect this device into the fuel pump on a car, and it would watch the engine, so it would take ignition pulses, and basically it was a watchdog timer. So if the ignition pulses stopped for more than a certain period of time, then it would turn off the fuel pump. And the concept was, if you were in a car involved in a car crash and the engine stalled, then the fuel pump would automatically cut off. So the stuff that I was doing was going into street cars and race cars and those sorts of things. So I was actually doing this and selling these devices based on my own designs. I was doing all of this stuff before the conversation with that lecturer where he said I had no basic understanding or aptitude for electronics. So that helps explain my reaction of me thinking, well, I'm out of here. This is stupid. And so my respect for the whole course was gone as a result of that. So where this is going is, I never finished uni. I started a Bachelor of Applied Science, but I never got past the first year stuff, plus a little bit of extra that by that point I was checked out. And so I have 0 formal qualifications. But by the time I was doing that, I was already actively doing electronics design, making my own products and selling them. And looking back now, it was actually Some of the things I did, I'm kind of amazed that I did them at the age that I did. And remember, this was, well, 1990, so ARPANET existed. The web was not yet really a thing. It was still like a research project. You couldn't just order parts online because there was no online. But I did things like design these circuits and then go and find, use the yellow pages, make phone calls. I found a printing company that made custom stickers for me, so I made front panel stickers made for these devices. In fact, I still have some of them. Because I'm a hoarder, I have, and a little bit nostalgic, I still have some of the devices that I made back around 1990. I have sitting on a shelf in the back of my garage. I wonder if 30-something years later, 31 years later, those devices still work. I should pull one out, stick it on the bench, and see what it does. All right. I'm now nearly half an hour into this live stream, and I'm still not talking about the legislation. But those of you who have been here before know this is the way it goes. Now, the result. So what I'm doing really is painting a picture of how I got to the place that I am in my life right now. It was through experience. It was through deciding that I was just going to do something and then doing it and figuring out how to do it along the way, solving the problems. And obviously in that 30-ish years, I've taken a few, the river has changed course a few times. I haven't been doing straight electronics for all of that time. For a large part of it, I was doing software. In fact, in 1994, I started a business that was a software company, and that business took up a lot of my time for a lot of that period. So for a lot of my career, I've been doing software development, and I went through a period of many years where I just didn't pick up a soldering iron at all. Probably, I wonder how long. Probably a period of about 10 years I didn't do any electronics, and then got back into it again as a hobbyist sort of thing. And over time, as I was extricating myself from IVT, which was the software business, I became progressively more and more involved in hardware again, to the point now where this is what I do. So designing things and writing the firmware that runs on it and solving problems for people, building devices, and for myself as well. So I have the Freetronics business, which sells a whole bunch of products that, primarily Arduino related stuff, but it's basically designing boards. I mean, I could look around, I'm surrounded by stuff that I've designed. Even little one-off things like, here's a macro keyboard with an LCD on it, USB-C, did this a few years ago, which I use for sending shortcuts and macros to Eagle for doing PCB design. So lots and lots of different things. Now, fast forward to today, or a week ago, when I can't remember where I came. I saw this. That thing has gone from my mind. I saw something that said that it would not be legal from July 1st to do engineering work unless you were registered. And then that, of course, raises the question of what does it take to be registered? So let's look at this process. Now, there are a number of different parts to this, and in many areas, in many parts of the world, many jurisdictions. Okay, let's look at a parallel. Say a medical doctor. If you cannot open a shop front and call yourself a medical practice and start practicing medicine without being authorized, which involves the necessary training and then being approved by whatever the board is. I don't know that field, so whatever the process is to become authorized to practice medicine. It's a regulated field, so it's a protected trade, and that's the case with many different things. And if you try doing that, like say you said, okay, I can do surgery on people, then you'll be charged with practicing medicine without without authorization or whatever it is. So there are many different professions that are protected in this way, and rightfully so. Absolutely. There are so many situations where the work that people do day to day has the potential to cause harm. And it's really important that we have trust in the person's ability, not just their ability, but their ethics and everything that goes along with it. It's important that they have, if something does go wrong, they have the necessary insurance to cover it, so that if you suffer the consequences of them making a mistake, there is then a recourse to have some kind of compensation for it. And if they're not insured, then they can go bankrupt, and then there's no compensation. So there are all sorts of little things like this tied into it. And in Australia, engineering has not been one of those protected professions until now. In many other parts of the world, it is a protected profession. So there are two things, as I mentioned right at the start of this live stream. There is what you're allowed to call yourself, and there is the work that you're allowed to do. And they are not necessarily, well, they're kind of related. The obvious thing is for someone to say, I will do surgery on you, but I'm not a doctor, I am a healer. I'm not claiming to do medicine, I'm not claiming to be a doctor, but I'm still going to conduct surgery. And of course, you can't have that sort of thing happening. So the way legislation is typically written is that it's not just what you call yourself, it's whether you undertake work that would be done by an authorized person. And if you do, then you are considered to be doing that work without authorization. So, okay, the legislation, let's see, I'm just going to pull it up to remind myself, where is it? Opening. Okay, so this, I'm going to give you a desktop view in a second. So this is, if my OBS will switch. What? Why do I not have, what happened then? I don't know what happened to my video. Come on. Switch. Nope, OBS is refusing to switch. Desktop. It's working too hard. Okay, so this is the actual text of the legislation. So it's the Professional Engineers Registration Act 2019, and it's the 26th Act of 2019. So it's got a whole lot of things, definitions, etc. Now, one thing I should explain about the structure of this, for various reasons, and one thing I hate reading is legislation, but I seem to keep doing it. There are things that come up where you just have to read the legislation. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that legislation needs to work over a period of time, even if specific circumstances change. So typically the way that it's written is that it will create a framework and then defer specific parts of that framework to external bodies who may adjust it from time to time, because you don't necessarily want to have to pass new legislation or an amendment to the legislation just because something changed slightly. All right, so let me explain what I mean. If you're writing legislation that is related to engineering, And the question is, what falls within the scope of engineering? And there are many different aspects to it. There's civil engineering, electrical engineering, fire and safety engineering, those sorts of things, which we'll see in just a moment. But what if you want to then change the scope to cover a different particular area of engineering? Or what if the process for becoming accredited changes? Because this legislation may have to stand for decades. And in a field like electronics or, there are other things as well, but we'll keep on topic. Electronics. The way you assess people for their ability has to change over time. The courses that are offered will change. The expectations on the specific knowledge will change over time. And you can't codify that in legislation. It's just not practical. Otherwise, what you would have to do is in the legislation, you would say, in order to be recognized as an engineer, you need to answer these particular questions on an exam. You can't be that specific. Parts of the process have to be externalized. So what the legislation does is define a bunch of things, and it has some parts of it that are internal and then some parts that are referenced externally. So the legislation, I think it's 92 pages long, 94 pages, but some of that is boilerplate and content and header pages and all of that sort of thing. So what it does is define things like assessment entity, assessment scheme, and these are all very, very important. The business licensing authority. So the way this works is the legislation is created which states the intention, and it's what the outcome is meant to be, but it doesn't say how that outcome should be achieved. What it does is say, step one, the legislation defines the outcome. It then defers to the business licensing authority to make the decision on how that is implemented. The business licensing authority then goes out for submissions from other bodies and says, how would you like this to be implemented? They make submissions, and the business licensing authority then accepts or rejects, or whatever those submissions. So the way this works is an external body, as an example, the number one example in this case, Engineers Australia, which is the peak professional body for engineering in Australia, makes an application to the business licensing authority and says, we believe that our organisation should be able to approve people under this scheme. We have put in place a mechanism whereby we assess potential members, and we have the relationship with educational institutions and the expertise to be able to assess whether an individual should qualify. So the business licensing authority then looks at that submission and says, yes, we think that Engineers Australia are reasonable people to run this assessment scheme, and we will trust their judgment on whether people should be authorised or not. So it's really a three-stage thing. There is the legislation, which is the intent, the business licensing authority, which acts as the administrator of that intent, and they then defer to external parties such as Engineers Australia to execute it and to do the assessments and to decide if people are qualified or not. All right, so there's lots of stuff in here. I'm not going to go through all 94 pages of this. If you want to read this, you certainly can. It's all public. Legislation. This is the cool thing. In Australia, legislation is public. You can just look it up and read it for yourself. You don't need to rely on other people to tell you what is legal and what is not, and what the requirements are. Unfortunately, it's not always clear. And that's really what it comes down to with this whole live stream today, with what I'm talking about, and trying to understand what you can do and what you can't do. Now, okay, oh, interesting. So this is, as a bit of background, it mentions here Victorian Building Authority and areas of engineering. I'm going to get back to that as well. But if we come back up here into these definitions, so we've got registered professional engineer, we've got Victorian Building Authority. So what I'm talking about, because it's in the context of my own work situation, is electronics. So it's designing circuits and attaching them to mechanical things sometimes, like building robots or whatever. But the genesis of this whole initiative and this legislation, from what I can tell, seems to have been within the field of civil engineering and problems within the building industry. So, which seems very, very different to designing a circuit board. We're talking about a group of people that design bridges or high-rise buildings or whatever, and they do all the calculations in relation to structural loading and concrete pre-tensioning and, or I don't know the terms, whatever it is that they do. They do a complicated job to design structures so that they are safe. And obviously that work has very direct and immediate safety implications. If you design a bridge and you have screwed up your calculations and something goes wrong, you might get part of the Westgate Bridge falling off, which is what happened in whenever it was. Or you might get buildings that fall down, or you might get the Grenfell Tower fires or something, and people die. So from what I can tell, there has been a problem in the building industry with people calling themselves an engineer or being given the job of doing these sorts of structural calculations in the context of a building project and not doing a good job of it and causing problems. And that is kind of the entry point that all of this began with. The idea of protecting the public, protecting the public's faith or trust in engineering, which is an interesting one. Maybe we'll talk about that later. And so what happened was that this legislation has been put in place primarily oriented around civil engineering and building, and that is reflected partly in this wording, wherever it was down here. Victorian Building Authority specifically mentioned in here. And if we look at the areas back down, right, here we go. So what are areas of engineering? It says structural engineering, civil engineering, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, fire safety engineering, any other prescribed area of engineering. So that's the wild card at the end that lets them just say, oh, and that's mine, and that's mine, and that's mine, and that's mine. So that's the open-ended thing on the end. But if you look at the order, it's interesting. So it does very much seem to begin structural engineering, civil engineering, mechanical engineering, and then moving down to related fields like electrical engineering, fire safety engineering, etc. If you just look at that list, you would think, that's all about building stuff. It's nothing to do with designing circuit boards. And that may have been the original intent of it, and it may still be the intent. That's what I'm trying to figure out, is how broad is the scope of this, where it says electrical engineering. Now, when I first read this, I thought it's obvious that this is related to people designing big buildings and all the things that go into those buildings, the parts of the buildings. So electrical engineering would be related to things like power distribution networks and all of those sorts of things. It's not about me putting some resistors down on a circuit board, but the scope is far broader than it may first seem. I wonder if now is a good time for me to look at the to look at the comments. No. Totally randomly, I just glanced across. Circuit boards go into fire alarms. That was the original intent. Yeah, okay. However, it is far broader than that. Let us have a look. Guidelines, areas of. Alright, so if this will open, come on Word, do your thing. So of course the first thing I thought was, well, does this actually relate to me and the stuff that I do? So you can see here the same list of 5 disciplines, and then it defines what those are. So in the legislation it just says, it's got this list essentially. But then this is one of the, this is the Professional Engineers Registration Act. This is like a supporting document. And if we come down to, oh, interesting. I haven't actually looked at this section. Mechanical engineering, I'm kind of curious about as well. Equipment engineering, including automotive and manufacturing, piping engineering, structural analysis, aerospace and aeronautical engineering. I designed a satellite payload once. Don't tell anyone. Alright, electrical engineering. When you read this bit, it is really amazingly broad. Electrical engineering is concerned with the design, application, manufacture, and maintenance of equipment, devices, plant, and systems which use electricity, electronics, and electromagnetism. These activities can apply to electricity generation, I thought that was reasonably straightforward, transmission, distribution, electrical installations in buildings and on industrial sites. Yeah, up to that point, that's all very much oriented around the construction industry. Electrical equipment manufacture, instrumentation and control system applications in industry, communications networks, electronic plant and equipment, and also the integration and control of computer systems. Okay, that suddenly starts to seem really rather broad. Instrumentation and control system applications in industry. Alright, so that means, this robot that I've been working on, that's a control system in industry. Communications networks, that's kind of broad. Electronic plant and equipment, and also the integration and control of computer systems. Like the way this is worded is super broad. And this is really where, for me, the uncertainty comes in. Now, jumping ahead a little bit, my reading of the legislation and the various supporting documents, and there are more that we might get to, if you follow it according to the letter, it means that the job that I do, designing things for people, is going to be illegal after July 1st unless I qualify according to one of the assessment schemes approved by the Business Licensing Authority. So, hold that thought. We'll get back to it. Alright, so just a little bit further on here. Electrical engineering has many different areas of focus. As a guide, some of the main areas of focus are control engineering, electronics engineering, and telecommunications engineering, such as signal processing, signaling and communications, and radio frequency engineering. Now, they're professional engineers providing professional engineering services in any of the above or main areas of focus must be registered in the area of electrical engineering. An electrical engineer, and this once again is talking about the building industry, and that's talking about a specific building industry endorsement. And this is also about building industry. So, summarizing, my feeling on this is that come July 1st, I am not going to have a sheriff knocking on my door serving a cease and desist notice telling me that I have to stop doing the things that I've been doing. I think that's rather unlikely. But what this means is that after July 1st, I'm in a bit of an unknown state. Maybe we'll look into this in a little bit. There's so many aspects to this. I'm trying to present this in kind of a linear narrative way, but this is not a planned presentation. It's basically me, freewheeling my way through some of the things that I've come across as I've been looking into this. And what else is there? So, fire safety engineering. Cool. Crossover areas of focus. Biomedical engineering. Oh, this is interesting. So maybe we'll get back to this later on. One of the courses that I was looking at recently was biomedical engineering, for reasons that many of you would already know based on things I talk about all the time. So that was guidelines. Where are we? Assessment. What was the other interesting thing? Final guidelines meaning? I can't remember which. Okay, so I think this is the bit that is about providing the services. I've got lots of screen space here. Let's use it. Make it easier for you to read as I'm jumping around. And this is where this is really where it comes down to, am I providing services that I shouldn't be providing? And you may have noticed that in the last document that I was reading, pretty much everything had the word engineering attached to it. And this, I think, is one of the critical things. So, what do they mean by engineering? So, alright, let's look at this. A professional engineering service is defined in Section 3.1 of the Act as an engineering service that requires or is based on the application of engineering principles and data to a design relating to engineering or to a construction, production, operation or maintenance activity related to engineering, other than an engineering service that is provided only in accordance with a prescriptive standard. Now, this is really a key point here, and it's kind of a curly one, but let's pin that one for a moment as well. Yeah, following on from this little bit here, that is provided only in accordance. So it says, as an engineering service that is provided only in accordance with a prescriptive standard is not a professional engineering service, a person who provides such a service is exempt from the requirement to be registered as a professional engineer. So this part that I've highlighted here is, I think, possibly the key to whether this is relevant to me or not. And then there is a whole, there is a squirrel we could chase in terms of the definition of a prescriptive standard, which is a whole other area. And I just noticed that my camera has done something crazy. It's changed its resolution or settings or something. Let's see what's going on here. Sorry for this temporary diversion. It's meant to be that. Yeah, okay. I don't know what's going on. My my camera has changed its settings. The field of view has changed. It's not relevant. Okay, so where was I? Yes, this section right here. So a prescriptive standard is, so this is if you are implementing something that has already been covered by a standard, and the standard tells you what you may and may not do, then it's considered that you are not conducting engineering. You are, well, you're not, what is this? You are not conducting professional engineering, you are providing an engineering service, and you are exempt. So if there is a standard that has been defined, I'm trying to think of an example. I probably can't think of one off the top of my head right now. This is one of those classic things of put someone under pressure and their brain turns to mush. So what it comes down to is the difference between design and implementation. And implementing something, even if it involves doing something like laying out a circuit board that implements a standard that has been defined, then it's exempt. So that's more like a technician role, I suppose, even if it's a even if it is quite technically challenging and a complicated thing to do. So where are we? Yeah. Okay. Here's another interesting one. I'm kind of just going to be pointing at stuff for now, for this little part of it. Providing a professional engineering service involves giving advice or assistance and/or undertaking work for a client and for an employer, which means you can't even tell people what they should do. You can't, quite apart from doing the work or the implementation yourself or designing something, you can't even talk to a client or an employer and give advice if that advice requires engineering. So, and this is regardless of what you call yourself. The title is irrelevant. It's whether you are doing this work. So, distinguishing professional engineering services from other services. Now, I've read so many documents that I can't remember where specific things are, but I think this is the relevant point. Distinguishing professional engineering services from other services. And I think this is the crux of it. It is, if a client comes to me and says, I want you to design a control system for this piece of machinery, and then I take their requirements and I design the circuit and I prototype it and we test it, we write the firmware for it, and then it goes into production. Is that professional engineering services? So, the Act distinguishes professional engineering services from other services, including those other services that may be provided by engineers, by the specialized nature of the service. Aren't these sentences so much fun? You got to sort of pause for a moment to let your brain parse it. It's kind of like programming, but not quite. All right, in the context of the Act, professional engineering services are a narrowly defined subset of engineering services and are characterized by the high degree of engineering judgment, knowledge, and skill required to provide those services. Now, what I'm looking for is a particular thing I read previously. I can't remember if it was here or elsewhere. All right, well, here's a good sentence. A professional engineer designs, develops, and analyzes systems, applications, and equipment relating to construction, production, operation, or maintenance. A professional engineer is responsible for applying engineering principles, data, and their specialist knowledge of applied science, including physics and chemistry and mathematics, to do their work. While an engineering technologist may use some of the same skills as a professional engineer, the roles fundamentally differ in that an engineering technologist's responsibility is to adopt and apply technologies or develop related technologies to create, operate, maintain, and improve the systems, applications, and equipment originally designed by professional engineers. So if you started design from scratch, does that mean that you are required to be a professional engineer? While the Act requires professional engineers to be registered to provide professional engineering services, it does not require engineering technologists to be registered to provide other engineering services. Okay, so let's just pull a couple of elements out of this. The Act requires professional engineers to be registered. All right, that's a key point. So, what is a professional engineer? The professional engineer is responsible for all of this stuff that I just read. Now, their specialist knowledge of applied science, including physics and chemistry and mathematics. All right, so somewhere else there is a sentence, maybe it's in this document, maybe it's elsewhere, that it is about the, where is it? Oh, yeah, here we go. This is what I was looking for. Drawing on its ordinary meaning, engineering is the art or science of practically applying knowledge of pure sciences such as physics and chemistry and mathematics. Similarly, the work of an engineer is to use scientific principles in the design, construction, repair, or control of engines, machines, or electrical equipment, etc. Now, use scientific principles. All right, so somewhere down here, here or in another document, there is a thing. We could be going through this for hours, and all I'm doing is reading little sentences out of it. What I'm trying, okay. I'm looking for the relevant parts that get to the point I'm making. The use of engineering data may require calculations to be made, and where this is the case, the outcomes of those calculations should be interpreted in the context of a particular system, application, or equipment concerned. So, what this seems to be saying, if you look at these different things that I've pulled out of here, if you're being really pedantic about it, if you apply Ohm's law, are you doing calculations based on principles of physics, and therefore that is a professional engineering service? Well, it looks like it. The way this is written, it certainly sounds like it. And this is really where my difficulty comes in, and I still don't know. I can't figure out, having read 94 pages of legislation, many supporting documents, etc., whether I am allowed to do things I'm doing, or whether I have to stop, or I have to become authorized through one of the approved assessment processes. This is what it comes down to. Maybe you can help me figure it out, because I still don't know. Okay, so professional engineers and engineering technologists. Is the work that I'm doing considered to be the work of a professional engineer, or is it considered to be the work of an engineering technologist? So, production, okay, let's look at production, because that's basically what matters to me. A professional engineer designs the tools, processes, and equipment required to turn raw materials into a desired product in the most efficient and economic manner. An engineering technologist or technician executes the designs and specifications set out by the professional engineer to implement and monitor the final production process. If you just look at that paragraph, those two sentences, the things I do definitely fall into the category of what they call services of a professional engineer. So I design tools, I design processes, I design equipment, and I am starting from scratch, new designs, new ideas, and obviously it should go without saying that all of this is standing on the shoulders of so many other people, and everything that I've learnt from other people. I'm not saying in any way that I have invented new things or that the stuff I do is unique. We all all are where we are because of tens or hundreds of thousands of years of history that brought us to this point. So that definition, though, in a production setting, that seems to sum up what I do. Which means I probably need to begin the process of becoming authorized. All right. So I think that is a reasonable point to transition into a different part of this discussion. What I've been talking about is so far is the legislation and what it says, and the question of whether it applies to me. Now, so far I've been totally glossing over the question of, all right, so to become professional and to become authorized using one of these approved schemes or processes, what does that mean? What do you do? Oh look, yeah, my camera is, it's gone to a wide field of view. Okay. Pause for a drink. I would say talk among yourselves in the meantime, but you already are. I'm at the end of this, I really have not been looking at the chat at all. It's been scrolling by. I just got a big orange thing though. James, $25 for hiring a legal consultant to find out. And I wonder if they need to be registered somewhere. A legal consultant, yeah. I think lawyers have to be authorized to practice law. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Now, just as I've been glancing at the chat, I noticed a couple of things going past. There are a couple of points that I should mention. And this comes down to James's thing about hiring a legal consultant as well. So my friend Peter, who is in the chat here, when he saw my post about this, he immediately got in touch and said, you should fight this legally and raise some funds, etc. And my response to Peter was, I don't have the energy or the brain space for a fight like that. And I don't. What this comes down to is I want to be, sitting at this computer designing things and at this bench building them and testing them, and I want to be making stuff. That's what I love doing. The idea of fighting this, contesting this politically or legally or through the media or whatever, just the thought of that makes me feel exhausted, and I'm really not up for that sort of fight. And I don't think there necessarily is even a need for a fight. I think what there is a need for is understanding, for me to understand, and maybe for a little bit more clarification, which may well come. So some clarification around what are the implications of this legislation and the registration scheme. Are people who are working in this field currently going to have to stop working if they don't comply with those? Station 240, thanks for the 10 Kenga bucks. I bet $10 the politicians involved had to look up how to spell engineering. Yeah. So, all right. Now there was a comment there I just saw going past from Kevin, who says, ACS already has guidelines for tech professionals. It's almost entirely do a 4-year degree and then work under someone who is a professional. Yes, that whole aspect of it, that is what I'm about to get into. That's probably going to be a large part of the rest of the live stream. So, I'm still left with this slight unknown. This is a question that I need to resolve. Do I need to go through one of these approved assessment processes and then pay my annual license fee, my my guild membership tax, in order to continue doing the things that I'm already doing? I don't know. Even after having read through all of this, I don't know. Based on the things that I've shown you so far, it certainly looks like it. It looks like, for the services that I provide, I have to be on the National Engineering Register and be authorised and pay my fees to Engineers Australia. So, okay, just going down a totally cynical path for a while, I've heard a number of people say things like they were members of Engineers Australia in the past and it did nothing for them, so they dropped their membership. So the really cynical way of looking at this is that this is all a big move by Engineers Australia to make themselves relevant and to bring in lots of that cash folding money, because there is an entire industry of people who are currently unregistered and are not members of the professional association, and this is a way of Engineers Australia using legislation and as the big stick to say, if you want to keep working in the industry you already work in, you have to join our organisation and pay us fees every year. So one of the side effects of this is that the membership of Engineers Australia is probably going to jump dramatically. Their annual revenue is going to go through the roof. And it's going to be people who are joining only because they are legally required to and to pay their fees, and who get zero other benefits from being a member. Okay, so that's my super cynical take on it. And that is, if you just look at it, if you come into this and look at what's going on, that is what it looks like. That is the takeaway. So I understand it from Engineers Australia's point of view. They want to have lots of members and they want to make lots of money. So this is a mighty big stick to use to beat people into being members. Alright, so let's look at the next stage of it, which is assuming I had to become authorised to continue work. The legislation has delegated to the Business Licensing Authority the right to select the assessment processes. They then put out, actually I'll pull this up, is this the right document? Yes, okay, so this is the document. Hang on, you can't see it. You need my desktop, don't you? Go Gadget Desktop. Alright, so this is media release. It's actually not that long ago. December 2020. Assessment schemes for registration of professional engineers open. So what happened was that after the legislation was passed, the Business Licensing Authority then opened up this call for submissions for assessment schemes. So this is the crux of it. The assessment schemes will help ensure Victoria's registered engineers are appropriately qualified and experienced. Victoria's new mandatory registration scheme will require professional engineers to meet qualification and experience requirements to be registered and to complete continuing professional development to renew their registration every 3 years, etc., etc. So the whole point of this, and there's the dates. So the point of this is for submissions about what does it actually mean to be a registered professional engineer. Now, one critical point here is you can see the Act was passed in 2019. It commences on 1st of July 2021 and will be progressively introduced for each of the 5 areas of engineering by 1st of December 2023. So there is a 2.5-year transition during which this is all going to be introduced. So presumably by the end of 1st of December 2023, 2.5 years after it begins, it will be necessary for people providing these services to be licensed. Oh, and also something else I should mention. I came across, it'll take me a while to dig it up in all the documents I've got, but one thing I came across is, I can't remember if, I think it's in the legislation itself. The statement that says, it's about jurisdiction. So if you live in Victoria and provide engineering services to customers outside of Victoria, you have to be registered. If you live in Victoria and you provide services within Victoria, then obviously you have to be registered. If you live outside of Victoria and you provide services into Victoria, you have to be registered, which blows my mind. I hope I've misread that, because that just sounds so ridiculous. If you were a company in Victoria and you wanted to hire an engineer, and that contract an engineer or something, and that engineer lived in Sydney, does that engineer then have to be registered within Victoria to do that work? Kind of silly. Actually, that reminds me, back, so a similar thing. As many of you would already know, a long time ago, I worked as a crowd controller and security guard and doing personal security. And so I got the qualifications. I had the license in Victoria to do those things, because you have to be licensed. And because I worked at events in New South Wales as well, so I would go up to New South Wales to do security at events up there, I also had to have a license to provide security services in New South Wales. So I had, which was, from memory, it was issued by like the firearms department or something. It was kind of weird. But anyway, similar situation. I lived in Victoria. I would travel to New South Wales in order to provide security services there. So I was working for a company called New Breed Security, which provided security services to musicians and that sort of thing. And anyway, I'm going to stop talking about that right now because that's a squirrel. But anyway, my point is that this is kind of related. It's a jurisdictional thing. It's a question of, if you're going to be providing services into a jurisdiction, then that jurisdiction can require you to be registered within that jurisdiction. And that seems to be the case with this. Anyway, where the hell am I? I don't know. All right, now what I was about to look at was, all right, assuming that I need to become registered and that the clock is ticking because this progressive introduction commences on 1st of July, what do I need to do to become registered / approved / qualified / licensed, whatever you want to call it? Now, let's start digging around. So, Engineers Australia run the National Engineering Register, the NER, and where will I drag this to? That should do right about there. Your application guidelines. So, to get onto the National Engineering Register, what does it take? Let's look. We'll go digging. Alright, so why be registered on the NER? Alright, don't care about post-nominal, don't care about titles, and as far as, you know, jobs and things work, jobs and things go, nobody in Australia cares. Like, no employers really care about this. And oh yeah, this is the thing about the professional indemnity insurance I was talking about earlier. In addition, the NER post-nominal signals that registrants in the provision of engineering and engineering-related services can maintain and have the benefit of professional indemnity insurance in the event that a professional services provider fails to discharge his or her duties properly. Alright, so you have to have professional indemnity insurance, which I already do. Like I've got, it's like $5 million of insurance or something that I have, just in case something that I work on causes damage. Where are we? Alright, this is what we care about: information telecommunications and electronics engineering. Benefits. Who can register? Okay, chartered members of Engineers Australia, which can be professional engineer, engineering technologist, or engineering associate. I think there's also an affiliate category, and we may well get to that, but let's see. Alright. Engineers Australia members in each occupational category, so we've got those three that are above, who have accumulated 5 years of relevant engineering industry experience in the past 7 years in their areas of practice, who provide satisfactory work experience and continuing professional development, CPD, statements verified at interview, and who have the benefit of professional indemnity insurance and demonstrate that they can maintain PI insurance, etc. Alright, so that's another person that can register. Okay, non-members of Engineers Australia, so this is probably getting into the relevant section for me at least, who have accumulated 5 years of relevant engineering industry experience in the past 7 years in their areas of practice, non-members, blah blah blah, complete a qualifications stage 1 competency assessment. So that's a critical point. We may look at that in detail as well. Provide satisfactory work experience and continuing CPD, statements verified at interview, have PI insurance, etc. So, how do we get onto the National Engineering Register? Preparing. Alright, so these are the key things. So, the NER eligibility requirements have been set such that engineers in the provision of engineering and or engineering-related services can attest to the fact that they have a recognised qualification, relevant professional practice, currency of CPD, benefit of professional indemnity insurance, and a commitment to ethical practice. So, 5 points. All well and good. Except I don't have that. And that's what kicked this whole thing off in the first place. This whole schmozzle was me going through largely the process that I've just been talking through so far of, oh, there's new legislation, I have to be registered. Do I have to be registered? Maybe. If I'm registered, what's it going to take? Let me find out. Okay, this is what I need. Point 1, a recognised qualification. Oops. Sorry, I do not qualify. Hence my my long-winded story at the beginning of this, with my history of education. So, chartered members, yeah, okay, let's skip over that. Interview, etc., lots of requirements. Assessment process. Alright, now somewhere in here there is some interesting wording that is kind of insulting, except that it's kind of funny as well. We'll see if we come across that. Okay, so this is the crux. Okay, so going back up here, stage 1 competency. I mentioned that earlier. Where is it? Here we go. Non-members, blah blah blah, complete a qualification stage 1 competency assessment, plus all of these other things like the work experience, etc. But you need the stage 1 competency assessment. Stage 1 is like the basic minimal thing. And here we go. Stage 1 assessment. Stage 1 competency is typically achieved through the successful completion of an Engineers Australia accredited engineering program at an Australian university. Overseas accredited engineering qualifications are recognised under the Washington Accord, Professional Engineer, or Sydney Accord, Engineering Technologist, or Dublin Accord, Engineering Associate. I know I've said this several times before, but this is the crux. So, the thing to know about these, so Washington Accord, Sydney Accord and Dublin Accord. Washington Accord is a 4-year degree, Sydney Accord is a 3-year degree, Dublin Accord is a 2-year. I don't know if they call it a degree, I think they call it a diploma or something. So if you do, for example, a 4-year degree under the Washington Accord, then you can qualify to be a professional engineer. If you do a 3-year degree under the Sydney Accord, you can qualify to be an engineering technologist. So not a professional engineer, just an engineering technologist. Or the Dublin Accord, which is the 2-year, like an associate diploma of electrical engineering, you know, that sort of thing. Dublin Accord, you can qualify to be an engineering associate. Okay, applicants with a non-accredited qualification. So say you didn't study something that was related to engineering. You might have, well, it could be engineering adjacent, like it could be a science degree or something, but some degree that is not on their specific list of approved courses under these accords, like the Washington Accord or the Sydney Accord. Then you must undertake a Stage 1 competency assessment in which academic certificates and transcripts, CV and other career episodes are assessed. Alrighty, so it looks like here we might have a pathway forward. Maybe without one of these specific engineering qualifications, it's possible to work through this with the Stage 1 competency assessment and become a member of the National Engineering Register. Okay, where are we up to? Where are we up to? Trying to decipher what I should do with the rest of my life. You do not want to sell me death sticks. I do not want to sell you death sticks. Okay. I will go home and think about what I want to do with the rest of my life. Okay, Queensland. So in Queensland they already have this thing, I think. Yeah. Oh, and the thing I should mention is I've been talking about all of this in the context of Victoria. But if you live outside Victoria, don't think, ho ho ho, those silly Victorians, it doesn't apply to me. It's coming for you. The forces that lobbied for this are lobbying for the exact same thing in every other state in Australia. It's coming. Don't think it won't. So, the assessment process. All right. So we're going to be assessed by highly skilled people, probably people like my digital logic instructor at uni. Great, I would love to be assessed by him. And assessment time frame, okay, takes them a few weeks and there's a cost, etc. So, where are we? Cancellation, no, alright. That's just the application guidelines, that's not all that. What else am I going to find? Stage 1, is this the thing I'm looking for? Competency, Guide to Eligibility for Membership. Ooh, this sounds like it could be the ticket. It is the Engineers Australia Stage 1 Competency Assessment Booklet, Guide to Eligibility for Membership, November 2019. I think this is the most recent one. There may be a newer one, but I don't think they change frequently. Excuse me. Time for another drink. Okay, if you got a drink, take a drink. All right. Mandatory requirements. Mandatory. Okay. Oh, here it is. This is the sentence that I was referring to earlier. That's kind of insulting and kind of funny. mandatory requirements. Let me just read this through. It is mandatory to demonstrate that adequate underpinning engineering knowledge has been obtained. This knowledge is most easily obtained as part of an initial engineering qualification. Engineers Australia supports the highest standards in the engineering profession. Candidates holding non-engineering qualifications or qualifications in fields related to engineering should take note that their qualifications and experience, while providing the basis for a satisfying career in the engineering field, may not meet these standards. If there is a shortfall in the underpinning engineering knowledge base, then bridging the educational gap is difficult to demonstrate with work experience alone. In most cases, additional formal educational study would be required. Right. And reading this was the point at which I started looking around on uni websites and reading about going back to uni and studying and obtaining one of these formal qualifications. Okay, and this is kind of reiterating what we've already seen. The engineering team, professional engineer, so 4-year Bachelor of Engineering degree or a 5-year engineering master's, so that's like a Washington Accord. Engineering technologist underpinned by a 3-year Bachelor of Engineering Technology degree or Bachelor of Engineering Science degree, so that's the Sydney Accord that I was talking about. And engineering associate underpinned by a 2-year advanced diploma or associate degree in engineering, so that's the Dublin Accord that I was talking about. Oh, and here's the fourth one. I've mentioned this earlier, but we haven't actually come across it in any of the documents so far. There is a further category of affiliate. This category relates to those who do not hold any engineering qualification and have an active interest in contributing to the engineering profession. Now, my understanding is that affiliate doesn't actually allow you to work as an engineer. It's from this is a little it's a little squirrel, so I'm not going to chase this too much, but I don't think it's hugely relevant to this conversation today. From what I can tell, affiliate is for someone who wants to be a member of the register, but they don't necessarily need it for the purposes of being authorized to work in the field. It's I'm not sure who would go for that. Maybe someone who is like an engineering project manager but doesn't have engineering qualifications. They might be listed as an affiliate member of the National Engineering Register. So I think that, there are some interesting exemptions as well. You know, one of the exemptions is teaching engineering. You do not have to be a member, you do not have to qualify for any of this in order to teach it. I thought that was kind of funny. I came across that somewhere. Okay, so competency standards. 3 stages. Stage 1 is the level of competency needed for entry to practice as a qualifying member of the engineering team. So it's the most basic thing. So it's like a beginner level. This typically corresponds to completion of an accredited or recognized engineering qualification. Stage 2 is level of competency expected of an experienced engineering practitioner and is the requirement for chartered membership of Engineers Australia, stage 3, etc. All right, so stage 1, that's what we care about. It means you have a thorough understanding of the body of engineering knowledge relevant to your occupational category, either professional engineer, engineering technologist, or engineering associate, and the ability to apply this knowledge to representative problems and situations. 3 components: knowledge base, engineering ability, professional attributes. Cool. All seems fair enough. Now, what I am looking for in all of this is, what does it take for someone in my circumstances without a formal engineering qualification, but who has been working in the field in various forms for 30 odd years to become listed on the National Engineering Register. Is it possible? What do I have to do? So making an application. Okay. Application for membership, blah, blah, blah. Lots of information. Interviews, stuff, documentary evidence of employment for career episodes. Now this would actually be an interesting one. So what I have to do is submit my CV which shows my career, and as I've mentioned, like we've come across this previously in a document, you have to show that you have spent 5 years out of the last 7 years actively involved in the industry, and it needs to be documented. So each stage of the CV has to be verified by a responsible engineer, preferably a member, and they have to give this statement, etc., etc. And so what you have to do, something I kind of glossed over, it was in one of the documents that I scrolled through earlier, is about a thing they call career episodes. And part of this is that you have to submit essentially essays about things that you have done in your career. Maybe it's in this section. It might be repeated in here as well, because it's here that it really is most relevant. What you have to do is write up a series of career episodes. From memory, you have to write 3 of them. And the career episode is 1,500 to 2,000 words about particular part of your career where you worked on a project, challenges you faced, what you learned, all of those sorts of things. And the career episodes have to relate to specific areas of expertise. That's all documented elsewhere. We may come across it here, we may not. Okay, so what if you cannot provide a verified CV due to the fact that you've been running your own businesses for 30 years and do not have a member of or a fellow of Engineers Australia who can verify each of those things? So I'm just going to leave that there. There's a little bit of a hurdle for me in that. What else have we got? Copies of the original testament of your degree, diploma, certificate, or other certificates of other contributing qualifications, academic transcripts, blah, blah, blah. Are you tired yet? I'm tired. Going through this stuff is hard work, and this is what I've been doing this week, is looking through this and figuring out, oh, look, here we go, career episodes, and figuring out whether this applies to me. This is the career episodes thing that I was just talking about. So you have to write up, where are we? Choose 3 major learning experiences that you believe are able to demonstrate the range of competencies of your occupational category. A substantial project or design exercise, for example. And then, 1,500 to 2,000 words. And what you did. I mean, I can do that. I can write. So, I can write, and I've designed stuff. So I can write about designing stuff. I could manage that. 3 essays of 4,500 to 6,000 words total. Alright, we can get past that hurdle. What else do we need to do? It'll just be unfortunate that I wouldn't get royalties from it. I was talking about this for 1 hour and 40 minutes. I'm kind of fading. Career episodes relating to engineering employment, personal performance, how you work with other team members. Plagiarism is bad. Okay, yep. And review, appeal, and that's pretty much the end of it. So, and this is the checklist of what you supply with your application. So, verified curriculum vitae. That would be a difficulty for me. I can show an awful lot of documentation of projects I've worked on, but having a registered engineer sign a statement saying that they witnessed me working on those things, I probably couldn't do that. Fees. Fees. It's in the order, I can't remember the numbers. I don't think are in here. It's somewhere in the order of a few $100s to do the application. And the application is non-refundable, so if I apply for it, I think it's like, I'm probably wrong about this, but I think the application is like $300, and then there's an annual fee which is like in the order of $100 and something. I don't remember. So it's not in the thousands of dollars region, it's in the hundreds of dollars region to be on the National Engineering Register. All right. So, do I need to go back to uni? It's 11:41. Time is almost over. What I was actually wanting to talk about, all of this has been about, do I have to, and are our jobs in peril? And the only summary that I can come to at the moment is, I don't know. It's still open. And with the things that I've gone through so far, like I've shown you a whole bunch of stuff. On the face of it, if you look at the legislation, if you look at the scope of the definitions of the supporting material, then I probably need to go through an assessment process and become listed on the National Engineering Register in order to continue charging people to provide the services that I currently do. So for me, the question then becomes, okay, how do I get onto that register? What is the process? It's possible that I don't need to, but just on what we've gone through so far today, it looks like I probably should. So, anyway, Ecognito 3. Now that I've finished with my introduction, yes, those of you who have been here before know how this goes. All right. Now, sorry, I'm looking at my screen trying to figure out where this goes from here. All right. As a positive and interesting side to this now, let's look at some interesting stuff. Because, okay, bringing it back to the start of this whole shamozzle, my shamozzle 30-something years ago with bombing out of my robotics course. That irks me. That has been a thing in the back of my brain going, for 30-something years. And I've talked about this before as well. I suffer imposter syndrome. I feel like I am unqualified to do the things I do. And I don't know whether it would make any difference, but I think a part of it is this feeling that I have learned things and figured things out for myself along the way. And when I say for myself, I mean like reading things, looking up information, finding things out when I need to know it, not having it presented to me in a structured course. So I know there are big holes in my knowledge, and particularly my experience with primary school, with that very eclectic sort of education process. I know that there are big chunks of things that someone who has done a base, like an undergraduate engineering course, knows that I've never even heard of. There are just chunks of knowledge that I'm missing because my approach to solving problems has been to learn those things specific to the context of what I'm doing as I go. And I've worked on a very large number of projects across very different sorts of areas. And this is something that I find interesting is when you work on one project and you learn about something, and then you work on a totally unrelated project, and your knowledge in that other project feeds into it. And this is cross-disciplinary as well. It's what I'm talking about is when you have knowledge of a particular field, and the way something is done in one field is totally different to the way it is done in a different field. And then that cross-pollination can be really powerful. My point in this is I have a feeling that part of this whole imposter syndrome that I've felt for as long as I can remember is that feeling that I bombed out of my course, therefore I do not deserve to do the things that I do. And that I don't know what I'm talking about, I'm making it up as I go, and one day I'm going to be found out and everybody's going to realize that I'm a fraud. I mean, that's the basic thing. So, so in the back of my mind for a long time has been this idea, I actually would like to go back and complete a degree. And it's not necessarily, I mean, there are many reasons for doing it. It's not even necessarily going to give me specific things that will make me better at my job, but it could be very significant for my own perception of how I do things and whether I actually belong or whether I'm just someone that sits here in front of a camera and pretends to know stuff and really doesn't know stuff. Because everything I know, I look it up or figure it out when I need it, not because it's already in my head. So, let's have a look at some things. So the idea of can we? No, what is that font? Oh, that's font size. Where's zoom? Let's just do a zoom, zoomy zoom. So I looked at a bunch of courses, and these are a couple of the options. Now, this one, Bachelor of Engineering, Technology, Mechatronics. This is, so Chisholm, which then became, it's part of Monash, I think. Oh, it became affiliated with Monash while I was there. Basically what this would be doing is going back to finish what I started. And I'm not necessarily directly interested in doing it there. But there are a couple of other things. Let's have a look at, well, there's Deakin. Let's open these up. And Swinburne, Bachelor of Engineering, Honours. All right, so considerations in all of this. I'm busy. I'm not at that point in my career where I'm 19 years old or 20 years old and spending 4 years full-time to do a degree is fine, because then the benefits of that flow on throughout the rest of my life. So I am in my twilight years, I suppose you could say. And if I have to do something like a 4-year degree, like a 4-year full-time degree, if you do it part-time, is 8 years. And I would be old, let's just say, by the time I finished an 8-year course. And it wouldn't be done in time to make any difference as far as this engineering registration thing is anyway. So I don't know. But so right now I'm at the stage where I'm looking at courses and thinking, it would be kind of nice to go back and study that. So I don't know if it's practical or not. Oh, Leon. Thanks for the $5. I appreciate it. Adam Savage talks about this regularly, and I feel very, very similar all the time. Yep. So I think imposter syndrome is a common thing. Yeah. So as I said earlier, I'm largely ignoring the chat. It's just streaming past, and I will go back and read it after this stream, but it's really not practical for me to be following everything. But when someone donates like a super chat or something, it pops up in a bright color and I see it out of the corner of my eye. So that's why I noticed Leon's comment. So, all right, courses. Here we go. Hawthorne campus, 4 years full-time or equivalent part-time. So 8 years if it was part-time. Course structure, all looks cool. Which is the one? So engineering courses, the one at Swinburne. No, it is this one. So there are a couple of different majors that you can do. So Bachelor of Engineering with Honours is the 4-year degree, and there are a couple of majors. You can do biomedical, you can do electrical and electronic, robotics and mechatronics, software, etc. And then there is a course planner. So I'm not going to go into this in huge detail now, but there are certainly some interesting looking courses. Like if you look at the Bachelor of Mechatronics Engineering at Deakin, which also looks like a really cool course, and I would not quite sure how to say this, and maybe it's me setting up expectations that just aren't there, but to me it seems like going back and studying this would be satisfying and interesting. Now, I might start something like this and then it turns out to be horrible and I hate it. Maybe, possibly. But this looks really interesting. So I could do something like go back and do a part-time bachelor's degree. So now, there is something that came up right before the live stream. I'm going to hold that thought for a moment. I'll get back to you on it. It's something that Michael Carden commented. And so, Mike, if you are in the chat shouting about it, I haven't forgotten. Oh, Scott. Scott sent me Canadian $5. If we send enough super chats to pay for it, will you video the entire course for us to watch? Well, actually, that is something that I thought would be really interesting. Not videoing the entire course to watch, but I think it would be really interesting to do regular updates. For example, if I do end up doing some kind of a course, whatever shape it takes, whether it's like an associate diploma or something, because I've been doing these Sunday live streams and talking about the projects that I do and random thoughts about this sort of work, I would certainly be reporting back, as it were, talking about, what did we do this week in mechatronics? So I think it would be kind of interesting to go through that process. I just saw out of the corner of my eye, Filter Champ said, do you want to gain skills you already have or learn new ones? That is a great question. Now, going back and doing a course, what prompted this was possibly needing to do one simply to continue doing the job that I already do. In which case, it's ticking a box on the application form for the NER, and the course itself I don't really care about. So what I would need to do is make sure that if I'm going to study, it is something that is really interesting and potential, and that adds to my skills, I think. Not covering old ground. Okay, so if we go back to the Swinburne one, there are core studies, okay. Now, there are a couple of interesting things here. And a key part of this is thinking about how I'm going to use it or what I'm going to do with this. What really interests me, I mean, this channel is Superhouse Automation. It's all about home automation. What's really interested me over the last few years, working with my friends Chris and Nick, has been the application of home automation to assistive technology requirements. So using home automation systems to help people who can benefit from them the most, like like wheelchair users, for example. And so what I've got to think about is, what would I actually do as an outcome of this study? And for me, I think mechatronics, so robotics and mechatronics, is probably the most relevant. Now, if we go to, like, choose a different major. I'm going to go to biomedical. Now, biomedical engineering looks absolutely fascinating. This is a subject, this is a course that I would love to do. It's got some really interesting things in it. It covers anatomy and physiology, so it's got a biology component to it, biomaterials and biomechanics. There is, just at a glance, there's probably about 50% crossover between biomedical engineering and mechatronics or robotics engineering. Many of the things are the same. Things like control circuits and feedback systems and programming and those sorts of things. A lot of it is the same. It's the application of it that is different, and that's why things like a biomedical engineering degree have anatomy and physiology, and which obviously you wouldn't find in a mechatronics degree, but a mechatronics degree has things you wouldn't find in a biomedical degree. They're both the same length, about 50% crossover. I would love to do a biomedical degree. But the question then becomes, how do you use that degree afterwards? What sort of work do you do? And most of the work that's related to biomedical work are things like medical instruments, either external or implants, or diagnostic equipment. It's things that directly interact with the human body. And those things, like the word is right there, medical. It falls into a very, very heavily regulated industry. If I did a biomedical engineering degree, the only way that I could make use of that degree would be to work for a big company that does medical devices or some related thing. I couldn't just sit here in my home lab designing medical devices and then selling them. It wouldn't happen. It's not reality. So as interesting as something like a biomedical engineering degree would be, I don't think it would do anything for me in terms of the work that I could do as a result of it. And if I didn't have, if I had lots of money sitting in the bank and I didn't care about working and I was just, what am I going to do with my time? What interests me and what do I really want to do? I would probably study a biomedical engineering degree full time. That sounds like an absolutely fascinating thing to do. But those aren't my circumstances. What would be more useful is, where is it? So that's biomedical. Choose a different major. Robotics and mechatronics. This is what really directly relates to the things that I do day to day. The types of projects that I work on, both commercial projects, working for other people, building devices for them. It largely falls into robotics these days, the type of stuff that I do. It's all about sensors, actuators, control systems, user interfaces, that sort of stuff. And it also covers the sorts of projects that I like to do more as a passion project. The stuff I love to do, like modifying wheelchairs and building custom input devices for people with disabilities. That sort of work fascinates me, It's kind of medical adjacent, but it's not medical. It really falls under this robotics and mechatronics region. And that is what I like to do. That's what I want to do. And it's the sort of thing that I can practically do sitting here in my own lab, building my own devices directly for people to help them and make their lives better. So between something like a mechatronics course and a biomedical engineering course, I think biomedical engineering would be more interesting in terms of the things that I would learn, and it would be more outside of my experience, so it would be new and fascinating. But I think mechatronics would be more directly related to the things that I do, and it overlaps much more with my regular day-to-day work, and then would have more ongoing beneficial consequences in terms of what I can do. But is it practical? Now, 8 years to do a course. Can I do that? And this is the thing that Michael Carden commented on. Now, I have no idea whether... When I saw this comment this morning, I thought, that is so out there that it's not relevant to me. What Michael said is he did a master's degree. I'm not quite sure of the specialty. I think it was an engineering related master's degree without having completed an undergraduate degree. And he did it in 2 years. So I think it was 2 years part-time. And so he commented this on, I think it was on Facebook? Yeah, somewhere. And so I wanted to know how that worked. And his reply was, he wrote an application to ANU to say, with his CV, outlining all of his work experience. So I should point out, Mike is a very experienced guy. He's done lots of really, really cool stuff. He's been working in engineering for a very long time and is a very clever guy. So what he did was wrote to ANU, so Australian National University in Canberra, and said, here is my work experience and I would like to apply for an undergraduate degree, like a bachelor's degree in engineering. And they wrote back to him and said, based on your work experience, you should do a master's degree. So he did. And he got his master's degree in 2 years, I think, while also working. So that is, in terms of time frame, that is much more achievable. And that comment was, I think it was about half an hour before this live stream began. And that kind of came out of left field. I had no idea that it was even possible. My assumption was, in order to do a master's degree, you have to have completed an undergraduate degree first. But ANU told him, no, master's degree, straight in for you, go for it. And maybe that's an option. I don't know. Once again, my whole imposter syndrome thing kicks in, and I think there is no way that I would qualify to get into a master's course. So I haven't had time to really even think about that, because this came up, as I said, right before the live stream. But it's something I'm going to look into. Maybe it's possible. That would be really, really amazingly cool if it is. Now, Peter has pointed out that it's lunchtime. Oh, Mike said, IT Masters. Okay. So Mike is right here in the chat. All right. And Paul said, won't know unless you try. Yep. All right. Final drink time. Okay. How to wrap this up? I don't know. I think this is an ongoing conversation that we are going to have because right now it's still unclear what falls under the jurisdiction of this legislation. It's easy to read it in a very broad way and say it applies to everything, and from July 1st you've got to stop unless you have this particular qualifications. But there is a transition period, a 2.5-year transition period, as I mentioned, and there is also the origin of the legislation, which really comes from that civil engineering and construction industry background that is a mitigating factor. And there is the whole question of that definition. If you design a circuit from scratch and you do calculations to to calculate certain parts of the circuit, I mean, you have to use things. This is I can't mention this before, the most basic example, Ohm's law. Okay, you apply Ohm's law to figure out the certain value you want of a resistor in order to have a certain amount of current flowing through part of a circuit, or timing on an RC network, or something really basic like that. The way the wording is at the moment, you are doing calculations based on principles of physics, and therefore you are doing professional engineering, and therefore that is one of these prescribed things. That is a really pedantic reading of it. Well, pedantic's the wrong word. I'm being pedantic about the pedantic words. So it looks to me like I need to pursue the process of getting onto the National Engineering Register in one of the qualifying categories. So not the affiliate category, it has to be one of the higher categories. And I need to try to do that in a way that is practical, given my circumstances. The fact that I can't just stop for 4 years and study full-time. Or I can't even stop for 2 years and study full-time, like for a diploma. It's just not practical. I need to be able to continue working, which means I can't make that a full-time thing. It has to be something that I do while also doing the work, which I've been doing for all this time. Okay, it feels like there's a whole lot more I haven't covered and I really should have, and I'm sure that you're frustrated right now because I haven't answered your questions. I'm sorry. I did my best. As Scott said, the word you're looking for is literal. Yes. Okay. I'm going to wrap it up. As Peter said, it's lunchtime. You should go and eat lunch. Or if you are Apostolos in Greece, it would now be 3:08 a.m. for you. And it's too late for your midnight snack. It's heading towards breakfast time. So thank you for coming along. This has been an interesting topic. It's interesting in some ways. It's unfortunate because this is not something that I feel like I should have to care about. I just want to design stuff and build stuff. That's what interests me. I don't want to be reading legislation to figure out whether I'm allowed to do my job or not. That sucks. But we'll figure it out together. So thank you very much for coming along. I hope you have a fantastic Sunday afternoon or Sunday morning if you're Apostolos. And I will see you next week. So please come again. I will see you. Go and build something awesome. Bye.